I'm Mark Tabago. I'm a solutions architect at Trend Micro with our AWS Alliances team. So, specifically in my role, I work with AWS SAs and accounts in AWS to help them understand best security strategies for whatever project they have in mind. If you were lucky enough to be in Vegas for reInvent, you may have also seen me on the show floor pedaling drones. That's tangentially related to what I'm going to talk about today.
One other
So,
thing I want to point out is, again, the focus of today's session is on we've got much more AWS content. Last week, we had much more in Microsoft. We did that to keep our content fresh and different. At the same time, if any of you have any questions on how Trend Micro security could be applied in different environments, you can contact me or Mark. You may be a Microsoft shop or a GCP shop, whatever it might be. You want to know how this plays in with Oracle Cloud, even though that's, let's say, out of Mark's specific responsibility, he and I can get you in touch with the right people. Okay, all yours, Mark.
again, Ron's pretty much a Trend employee, the way he understands our structure so well. So, if you were also lucky enough while you were in Vegas, or maybe you saw the recording, I know I had to, I was on the show floor all day. If you caught Security Talk 237, that was Steve Schmidt's talk, the innovation talk about security and effective security strategy evolution in AWS. And he had a key point that's probably the main focus of today's 15-minute session. Security is a people issue. Computers themselves do not attack people. And when we talk about security strategies at the board level and how we can evolve, what we take to the board to better inform our security strategies, we have to understand that there's an inherent overlap in the people, the human element, and the technical element of security. So when we think of something like how Trend Micro operates, whether that's within email, user endpoints, on-premise devices, legacy hardware, OT devices, we have to understand that these are not only technical sensors or aspects of security, but that they have an inherent human overlap. So in today's discussion about cloud security, we'll level set very briefly about what Trend sees in the cloud landscape with regards to AWS, and then we'll talk about combining that with the human element of security and what that means in terms of tooling. So let's start with cloud security. We foresee in some forecasts at Trend that in the future, I believe this number is by 2025, there will be a 30% increase in production workloads on public cloud infrastructure. Whether that's in AWS or any kind of multi-cloud deployment, there's going to be a marked increase in workloads going to the cloud. And this is industry-wide. From the show floor, I was able to learn from different customers or prospects about medical systems, financial systems, continuously adopting different aspects of AWS as they found it met their workload needs. But it's important to note that not every project is built equally. For legacy systems, or in talks with an AWS SA, you find that maybe a certain application isn't meant to be re-architected, or redesigned in AWS. We find that in numbers, 83% of workloads today across public cloud, this isn't AWS specific, are the result of lift and shift, where there's been a noticeable cost or maintenance benefit to move from an on-premise system to the cloud. But what we also find is that as a result of this 83% migration, there is an inherent lag in security of that hybrid environment. This isn't specific to Trend. This is from, I believe, a PwC report. But we find that in these hybrid environments where a previously legacy application moves into the cloud, there is a disconnect that exists in the on-premise and the cloud security solution. And having this disparate, separate tooling is challenging to these security professionals. And unfortunately, this does have trickle up effects, I guess, in when we take this information to the board. I'll build this slide out a little bit. What we're finding is the board, unfortunately, has so much going on that the nitty gritty of the technical aspects of security tend to, wash off on them. It turns out that their responsibility is organizational, making sure that their company, their organization is compliant to legal ramifications, to any kind of compliance framework. And this has a monetary cost, Consider GDPR. When it comes to GDPR, the violation cost is extremely high and actually scales depending on the severity of the violation. I believe there's a flat rate of, I believe, 11 to $22 million, and then those are tied to percentages of 2 to 4% of a company's revenue, whichever value is higher. So this means from the board's perspective, being able to understand how security can fit across the entire organization from cloud to the end user and every step in between has a real monetary cost. So, what do we have to do to assess this? Well, as it exists today, there is a couple of issues with cloud risk detection. And obviously, Shaked mentioned from Wiz the ability to do this with one platform, but we have to learn to consolidate. I mentioned, right, separate tool disparity, that 44 survey response, that 44% agreement that hybrid disparate consoling makes risk assessment more difficult. If we don't consolidate and we suffer from tool overload, we're going to open up windows of action. Windows of action for threat actors to be able to operate in vectors like you see on the screen here, where if we start with the threat actor finding any kind of misconfiguration in an AWS project, that leading to maybe some kind of vulnerability exploit down the line. So if we want to minimize the operating windows or even close them completely, it behooves us as security professionals and professionals concerned with the organization as a whole to identify these risks and remediate them in the order of highest severity or criticality. Right, the threat vectors here go all the way through the networking to, you'll see here 3 is an EC2 vulnerability, and then if the permissions of that EC2 allow access to S3 as an example, there is data extraction. You can see here we have industry use cases where open permissions like this have resulted in the upload and dispensing of crypto miners via S3. So again, we have to identify these risks and we need to manage them in order of severity or criticality. So at an organizational level, what does this look like? So again, you can use any variety of security solutions to accomplish this, whether that's like Shik had mentioned, a platform like Wiz or any other vendor that you may have in mind. You need to start by prioritizing different aspects or service utilizations in the company by, right, tangible, notable misconfigurations. So as an example here, we'll see that across an entire organization, we may have misconfigurations or risks in all of these, whether that's a storage bucket, any kind of compute, any kind of AD server. But from there, if we can assign scores and we can denote levels to our risk, then we can begin a risk assessment. So again, the risk assessment process, I would encourage you to perform this kind of risk assessment with whatever tooling you have today. For examples, I'm going to cover the process using trend consoling. So risk assessment has to start from an overview. You'll see here in the trend console, we can break this out into a variety of methodologies. I've done this by service utilizations. So we'll see across an entire organization how our cloud assets are broken out by location. In a multi-cloud deployment, this wouldn't just be an AWS graph. It would cover all our different multi-cloud projects. And then from here, once we have our accounts connected to our risk assessment platform of choice, we can do something like break out by service utilization. So compute, any kind of serverless environment, storage, container environment, etc. And from there, you'll know it's a little small in text. I encourage you to download the PDF following today's session. And you can see we have risk scores assigned to all of these different assets. So across clouds, across geographies, we can identify those high-risk assets. From there, we can break that high-level overview into something like an account-based view if we'd like to. So you'll see here an example account. From the public-facing side of things, we've broken it out through Route 53, you'll see here, into all the different subnets within this account. And we want to take that risk story and continue it into the account level because we have to understand who's the owner of this project and who should be responsible for remediating those risks. Once we do that, we can begin to understand the context of the individual services themselves, the individual utilizations. There is a cloud posture tool within the Trend Console, kind of outside the timing of today's presentation, but you can use that tool to, of course, address all the risks inherent to your cloud assets. And then once we have an idea of where the high risk assets lie, we can start to create something we can take to the board in terms of reporting. So, in terms of risk index, once we've assessed not only our cloud risk level, but the risk of our entire organization and how the cloud connects to that, we can show the board a tangible risk index or score. Or rather, you should be able to have some kind of number that you can take to a C-suite or a board level meeting. Because obviously, the overall goal of that meeting should be to identify the factors that feed into this risk index and then understand from a compliance standpoint what needs to be fixed within the environment to bring that risk index down. So, from a strategy perspective, this is all tooling that allows us to make human decisions about what needs to be fixed in our cloud environment. So, what does that strategy end up looking like? I'll go ahead and build the whole slide out. But again, the overlap exists in the technical and in the human. So what we've been talking about is attack surface risk management, right? Assessing the entire cloud environment we have in AWS, connecting that to other aspects of our organization, and understanding all the different threat vectors that could exist for a bad actor inside of our company. But that proactivity needs to be met with the human element, understanding once we have our high risk assets, how we can detect and effectively respond to those findings. And this you can use any kind of integration like AWS CloudTrail. Not listed here, Trend Micro was listed as of reInvent as an AWS built-in partner. So if you're interested in the built-in story, understanding how we can automate security across an AWS project at the platform level, feel free to reach out. And then that protection. This is again a technical aspect to cover human behaviors. So where we had this open, exploitable AWS architecture before, maybe not well configured, we can meet each aspect of the organization with a different security tool. Or in this case, sensor, you'll see how far we reach, right? Cloud ASRM. This is what I just talked about in terms of risk strategy. And then obviously the Trend Micro platform reaches all aspects of a cloud build in terms of sensor reach. And of course, I can always talk more about this if you're interested. Quick highlights. Again, everything we do here is an extension or a complement to the AWS native service. So as an example, where you might use a tool like AWS Macie for PII of objects in your bucket, we might want to append a scanning solution or a security tool to that S3 bucket. Make sure that that crypto mining story I alluded to earlier doesn't take shape in your environment. Of course, there are also the ability to deploy acting sensors in that compute environment, in your EC2 instances, in your workspaces, if that's a tool you use for end user systems. In your container environment, EKS, pictured in the slide, again, if you download the deck, much higher resolution, EKS, ECS, etc. Or in a key complementary case, where you might use a tool like AWS Network Firewall, we can actually supplement your network firewall deployment with Trend Micro firewall rules. And these are informed by the Zero Day Initiative. If you haven't heard of Trend, you've probably heard of the ZDI. That's the world's largest vendor agnostic bug bounty program. And all of these security sensors feed into that human element, that remediation as part of the Trend Vision 1 XDR platform. Now, obviously, we can't talk about security or tech these days without talking about Gen AI. Ron did allude to this. And we find that even though Gen AI can benefit threat actors or provide them with certain tools that they can use in their exploits, we find that the table is actually pretty well stacked for the cybersecurity professional in terms of where AI can sit. This is a truncated version of a wonderful talk our global risk strategist, Shannon Murphy, gave. There's a URL at the end of this presentation. It's in the PDF. I encourage you to check out her talk. But where she found that cybersecurity overlaps with AI is in a variety of solutions that benefit and enhance the human element of this sensor deployment. So if we look at the bottom of this slide, the Trend Vision One platform, we actually fit a lot of our Gen AI tooling into giving you workflows that you can act on and kind of designate risks and who should be in charge of fixing them. So I'll build these slides out. And these are videos. Again, Shannon did a great job in her presentation talking through this. So I'll breeze through these. You can check out her talk in its entirety later. But where we can use Gen AI as an example is in response. So here, inside of the trend consoling at least, we've taken and cross-correlated data across IAM users, servers, endpoints, and we've generated this workbench finding. So this is an event that we might want to start remediating. This is a risk that's already happened in our environment. You'll see right above the bars here that this is credential dumping. We notice credential dumping off of a given server. So where Gen AI comes in, you'll see on the right-hand side, is in fixing that skills shortage or in giving your junior analysts or new analysts time to ramp up. We can use Gen AI to close that knowledge gap. You'll see here our Gen AI tooling is explaining these commands in plain text. We're using common language to explain this exploit and how it propagates in an environment. And we can also use tooling like this, you'll see on the left-hand side, build out search queries that we can use to continue our threat hunting, or decode scripts if they're in maybe a language or they use a convention an analyst doesn't quite get just yet. Now I'll go ahead and continue here. This is a multi-minute video, and I'll build out the next slide. So let's say that our analyst understands that our Gen tooling has given him information about the threat. Now we can also use the same tool, or rather we should expect the same tool, to be able to begin ticketing and reporting processes. You'll see here in the video, I don't know if this translates well to the PDF, but we can use this tooling at least to create automated emails, translate them to different languages to fit the user. Again, if we have that organizational location-based view of our global cloud accounts, this kind of tooling is very important in making sure the messaging gets through to the right audience in a language they're comfortable in. Additionally, we can use tooling like this to query any kind of knowledge base we connect to our security platform. So in the trend case, this would connect to some of our cloud posture tooling platforms, our threat encyclopedia platforms, and again, deliver that knowledge in common language as we query for it. I'll go to the next slide here. Let me keep, that's too many. So again, when it comes to closing that knowledge gap, Gen AI is an invaluable tool for the security professional to improve our ability to investigate risk and speed up, you'll see there in quotes, our mean time to understand a risk and act on it. And what this means in terms of board meetings and bringing, again, a tangible result to the board is if we use our technology tooling to connect the human element of security, we can create an effective cloud security or organizational culture, of security for the entire company. And if we take this, this 2025 forecast, where we see that increase of public cloud adoption, and this leads to 60% of businesses housing over a third of their workloads on public cloud, we need to be able to account for that journey and lower risk in our organizations at the speed of business growth. So again, closing remarks here. I won't spend too long on these. The PDF is available. And if you're interested in starting a custom risk assessment, you want to take some action based a little bit on what we've seen in today's presentation. The URL isn't the prettiest, but you can download the PDF and click through, schedule a meeting, try out some of the tooling if you're not already using a platform like that today. And I look forward to hearing from you soon.